Today I'm meeting with Mike Allison, a licensed marriage and family therapist. And as usual, before we launch into the subject that you prepared, give people your contact information for anyone that would like to get in touch with you and talk with you later after hearing from you.
Okay, so my cell phone number is 801-644-9626, and you can reach me directly at that number.
And one other thing before we talk about the subject you've chosen. So are you court appointed? Do you take court appointments, or are you just a primarily private practice? I think you mentioned as we prepared over lunch that one of the things you often do is you'll work with first responders. Is that right?
Yeah, I do some trauma work with first responders who have some trauma that have come out of work, and so we spend a lot of time with trying to recover from that and get everybody back to work.
And I would think you probably spend some time with members of the military then.
I work in a trauma program, inpatient trauma program with active duty military folks that have severe combat trauma, sexual trauma, childhood trauma, and trying to recover from that.
That's great. And I don't want to pigeonhole Mike, because I just thought that was an interesting thing that you do, but not the only thing.
No, not the only.
So you're a marriage and family therapist dealing with a whole range of marriage and family therapy issues. Is that correct? But
yes.
I just thought it was an interesting thing about you, and do a lot of trauma work, but not exclusively trauma work.
No, and it does give us a little insight on what people bring to relationships and kind of the depth of some of the issues that people are dealing with in relationships that they may not have even shared with their partner.
Yeah. Now today we're going to talk about something a little different than normal, is because we often talk about how to deal with a potential divorce, preparing for divorce, going through a divorce, or dealing with the aftermath of divorce. But Mike's going to talk to us today about something different, and that is we hope to prevent a divorce by dealing with some issues of premarital counseling, or some premarital issues that you should identify and be aware of to either ensure that your marriage gets off to a strong start and stays strong, or perhaps you avoid marrying the wrong person in the first place.
Right.
Okay, so take it away.
Okay, and so as a marriage and family therapist, and we talked a little bit about people probably think marriage and family therapist, I want to keep every marriage going, every relationship, which I would love to do, but not every marriage is probably destined to go that way. But I think something that can really help is spending some time before we really get into these relationships to learn about the other person, and whether that's family therapy or working with your religious leaders, whatever it is probably okay, but the idea would be to find out something about your potential partner and kind of what they expect in a relationship, and maybe a little bit about where their relationship started, where their family came from, and how they see relationships.
And you mentioned, because we had a false start here where we had a bunch of phones going off and things like that, and so one of the things you said was we tend to put forth our perfect selves.
Right.
I remember doing that too before I married my wife. What can we do to, how do you get somebody to feel more comfortable letting down their guard and being willing to be that vulnerable? What are some, I don't, maybe even a bag of tricks about how
I wish I had a bag of tricks.
Yeah,
I could probably sell that.
You know what I mean? In other words, like, or some things that, hey, this may not work for everybody, but here's a couple of ideas that might help to break the ice.
I think going into relationships, probably the hardest thing, like we said, the idea that I want to put my best self out there, and sometimes that really isn't myself, and we don't really learn who the actual self is until we're deep into a relationship. But something that we avoid, I think, is really some of the honesty that we need to just put out there. What are some of the things, and I'm not talking, here's my history of trauma or these terrible things that happened to me, but just being able to say, I'm not really comfortable with this, or I'd like to, I have some things I'm dealing with, and I really feel like I should maybe be in the driver's seat of the relationship for a few weeks. Is that okay? And allowing the other person some space to say, all right, that's okay with me, or that's not okay, and kind of really being honest with yourself and getting your values and your boundaries out there where you really want them to be. And if someone is, for instance, if one partner is maybe a little more controlling than the other partner and you're not comfortable with that, that's the time to kind of bring this up. This is, wow, I'm having a lot of trouble with, feels a little controlling when you do this. I'd like to have more of a say, or I don't feel really comfortable doing this. These are tough things to talk about in an early relationship, but I'd probably rather talk about in the early relationship than being in your office.
That's what I was just about to say, is that, I mean, yeah, better to confront it before it's too late, or before you've made a lot of commitments, or you've got your first child, or things like that.
And a lot of organizations have some of these pre-marriage counseling or pre-marriage, even weekend outings and whatnot. And part of this is to just really learn a little more about the real person that you're spending time with, and trying to figure out the expectations. And I deal a lot with trying to get to people's actual expectations of their relationship, trying to get these out so each person knows, what does this other person really expect from a relationship?
What do you tell people like my young self at the time? It's like, I don't need this. Those touchy-feely seminars and retreats and things like that, because I have to admit that was the feeling. If I'd have talked to you when I was 21 years old, I probably would have said, "Oh, that's well and good, but I'm pretty squared away. I've got my feet solidly on the ground." What do you tell somebody like that who may think that's like, hey, that sounds like it might be useful for some people, but not for me? First of all, are there any exceptions? Is there anyone that would not benefit from some kind of premarital counseling or examination?
Well, I didn't think I would have benefited from it. That's why I turned it down when I was 22 years old. So, I mean, that's a pretty common feeling of, here's this person, were they going to step into my relationship and tell me how to do things? And really, that's not what those are about. Really, part of what we really do in some of those is take some evaluations and some interests, just sort of like you might have done with your high school counselor. What do you like to do? What things interest you? What are your priorities? And when both parties do this, bring it back, we get to sit down and talk about, hey, well, your partner here says she likes this. You say you don't like that ever. This might be something we would want to maybe just put on the table.
As we sit here, it just occurred to me that, would it be good to get some premarital counseling before you've even found someone you may consider marrying? Because it seems like if you knew yourself that well, it might keep you from getting involved with the wrong person before you're invested. Because I'm thinking another thing that would happen is, I don't want to find out this is wrong. I've invested too much time, too much effort. I also know that I'm really ugly and that this is the only person I've persuaded to like me, and I don't want to lose this person. And I even put up with a bad relationship than no relationship, but also.
And some people, that is their point, which is if I'd rather be in a relationship, any relationship, than be alone, I probably have some things I need to probably work on, just as far as really being a strong individual person. And this is so many times in marital therapy with longer-term relationships, we see people that are working so hard to protect the other person, to protect the relationship at their own expense. And what happens is, you might hear terms like codependent or enmeshment. What happens is we're spending so much time trying to protect each other, we're not going anywhere. And somebody becomes frustrated, they feel like the relationship's not going anywhere, they can't do what they want to do. And so we spend an awful lot of time working to get everybody able to stand on their own and kind of become their own person. And this is something that I don't know that we have a lot of experience with when we're teenagers or early adults really thinking about. But I think when we sit down and say, what are my values? And then you mentioned that maybe a toolkit or a bag of tricks. If I really sat down and did the proverbial piece of paper with a line down the middle and say, what do I have to have in a relationship? And what do I have to not have in a relationship? And if things that I start to really feel strongly about, I put down these pieces of paper and I say, these are non-negotiables over here. I either have to have them or not have them. If I say, I can't have any violence in my relationship, the first time something happens that becomes violence, which may be yelling, it may be slamming your hand on the table, it may be holding someone, in a violent way, that's where I have to use those boundaries and say, you know what, we're done. This is not going to work. And I think setting myself up with really coming to grips with what do I really want or not want in a relationship can really help, because that's where I spend a lot of time with my clients trying to go back and make relationships or fix them, is what do I really want? If I came armed with that to begin with, I might make a little better choice with my partner, and I know what to ask them. As
you say that, the question that came to mind is, would it be useful then for people to, as they said in my day at least, play the field? Because now you've made your tee sheet, you may discover that red hair really isn't that important. Right. So is there something to the idea of going and hanging out with people that you may not necessarily gravitate to naturally, and maybe find out that, where have you been all my life? I actually do like dancing. I actually do enjoy Indian food, or I enjoy going to church when I was never raised religious. Or is there something to that? Because then it kind of helps you to recalibrate your list, and you actually find out, I won't use violence as the example, although that's a good one. It's like, you know what, I really thought that I had to marry someone at least a foot taller than I am.
Right.
And then say, you know what, I actually really do like this person, and let's assume I like this woman and she's taller than I am.
Right.
But she
What
seems
am I
to,
gonna do?
yeah, she seems to like me. Maybe tall isn't that big a deal. She doesn't seem to be put off by it. It's not as important to me as I imagined. But is that something people ought to do, just to kind of test their assumptions, or what do you think?
I think this is kind of a complex question because, our society has kind of set us up in some ways because traditionally, what are we told to do? We don't live together before we're married, we don't have sex before we're married, so a lot of the things that are going to come down to our basic compatibility, we're not allowed to really test out before we get married. But if we go back and say, all right, so how successful are these marriages in our society? They're not very successful. They work about half the time, right? So what we've seen over the studies of marriage is that kind of about half the first marriages fail. Second marriages aren't tremendously successful, but third marriages are actually really successful.
Huh.
And when you get to be a little more mature, you know a little bit more about yourself, what you don't want in a partner, what you do want in a partner, you get a little more picky, I think, and you get a little more kind of maybe secure in who you are.
Let me address the elephant in the room simply because there's a lot of people that, because I know what you're not necessarily advocating these things, you're just saying certain suppositions may or may not prove to be accurate. You're not advocating that everybody live together before they get married. I presume.
No, I'm advocating that everybody decide what their values are and work from that standpoint.
Yeah.
And that may mean if my values are I'm not going to live with someone before I marry him, I'm not going to have sex with someone before I marry him, I'm probably going to need a pretty long courtship period and some help.
And I know I'm taking certain risks and there's certain rewards. Right. And because I wasn't trying to come down on that. I just wanted to make that clear is that I guess you have to be willing to examine your values and determine, because if they've been told to you, but deep down you never accepted them, that's a value that you don't really value, for lack of a better word, and that can have problems of its own. Or you may actually there may be some values you ought to adopt that you haven't because of whatever it is, your upbringing or some trauma in your life or something like that, where you've never been aware of this good thing. But then again, being exposed to some different sorts of things, it's like, wow, you know what? Skydiving and being more risk-taking actually has made me feel more alive, and I've come out of my shell. Or actually, I was such an arrogant SOB that, a little humility actually made me a better. Either way, seems like you're. Do you have an opinion on age, the general age of when someone ought to marry in today's world?
And that's probably an interesting question as well, because I probably don't have any science to throw after this, but let's say boys mature a little slower than girls, and girls are actually much more socialized before they turn 18 or 19. So I think sometimes it's a little easier in relationships with men who've had a chance to maybe mature a little more, and it may be if we're waiting later, till 25, 26, maybe something a little more when I do understand my values. But of course, a lot of that is also driven by society and what are we doing with it. If I'm a successful woman who wants to pursue a career and education, the likelihood that I'm going to get married early are fairly small. The likelihood I'm going to bear children early is fairly small. So being able to really say, again, these are my values, but if I have a partner, if I'm 20 years old and I'm going to college and I want to do these things and I have someone who wants to partner with me and I say, what I really want right now is I want to become a doctor, and I got all this ahead of me, and then I want a career, and that person says, you know what, that's great, I would love for you to do that. I'm going to do this. Maybe we can still be together and enjoy ourselves and be the people we want to be.
One thing that I really liked that I think humanizes marriage and family therapists in general that you mentioned was that a lot of people think, well, then your relationship must be really, being a marriage and family therapist,
awesome.
You must have a great relationship because, you can apply all these principles that you're sharing with and helping others develop at home. And you said, actually, I'm working at work. And in my own relationships, I'm not necessarily always on.
No.
And I thought, so in other words, you are someone that people can relate to. I do think that sometimes, myself included, it's like, well, I don't really want to talk to this marriage and family therapist. I don't want to open up about some of these things because, after all, he's mastered all of these things that make for a good relationship, and so maybe he'll look down his nose at me. You're saying,
I'm saying, I guess, what I've mastered is the ability in my not first wife, because I have more than one wife, and not because we're married at the same time, but I've had my divorce too. But the idea of what I have mastered is the need to stay in constant conversation and constant touch, and to understand my partner's expectations. She understands my expectations, and we can have very frank and open conversations. But that also means we make mistakes too. We get frustrated. We have fights. But the important part is what we do after that. We can come back together and say, look, what happened here? What's going on? Just this morning, my wife, I was leaving the house, and she says, it's been a pretty busy month. I haven't really felt very connected to you. And we talk like that sometimes. And I called her about, a couple miles down the road, and I said, we're going to be okay. We'll get this. We'll work this back out. She says, I know. I'm just letting you know where I sit with this. And that kind of thing. Who has these conversations? Not a lot of marriages have those conversations. They think it, and sometimes we're afraid because what would happen if my partner says, I don't care? And these are some scary places to be in a relationship. What happens if I tell my partner I really want to talk right now, and they say, I just want to watch the game, I don't want to talk to you? It's probably not going to happen, but we hold those in. And then we resent each other because what we're thinking we said, we never said, but we're reacting as if we had said it, and that causes some awesome fights.
How convenient can meeting with or consulting with a marriage and family therapist as yourself be? Like in your practice, work at 9 to 5 hours, evenings, weekends. What kind of options do people have if they're thinking of doing some premarital counseling, given all the other demands on their time?
As far as for the families, I would say that I know for me,
families or individuals.
Okay, I mean, I see people during the day on Fridays. I have some nights that I see people. I'm fairly flexible because I know this. We know that families have lives, and then of course in the evenings we have kids, we have cheerleading to go to, we have these other things to do, and I'll have people call me and say, hey, 10 o'clock's not good today, can I see you some other time today? Yeah, I'm open at 2, come on in at 2, or not going to make it this week, what can we do? Just stick with what we're doing and come next week, or maybe possibly one partner can show up, the other partner can't show up, and we just keep working with that, because ultimately it's about their journey. They're the ones who are deciding what to do with this, and they're the ones going in the direction. My job is just to kind of help guide maybe the therapy part, the technical part of this. They're the ones who know where they want to get to.
Well, that's very accommodating. Let me ask you a couple other questions as we wrap up then. Do you know because I don't know the answer to this question, is premarital counseling covered by insurance generally, or some insurances, or do you know, or like work supplied insurance?
I'm going to broaden that question up, because that's probably applies in a lot of different ways. And this isn't across the board, but as a relationship therapist, which is how I see myself, whoever's coming to see me, I don't care who you bring with you. So it may be grandpa this week, it may be your cousin next week, and it may be somebody from work, your best friend the week after that, that's somehow helping you realize what's going on in your life and improve things. So if most insurance companies will pay for you to go have an individual session, they're not going to ask, who did you bring to the session, usually. There's also family sessions, but usually there's some family connection with that. But they're not, they don't sit here and say, what was the actual relationship? But I know for a lot of people, let's say, for instance, and you'll appreciate this, I think, but we live in a state where there are some relationships that you're not going to be able to have a marriage, a formal marriage that's going to be recognized by the courts. Does that mean I can't bring my partner to couples therapy? No, you can bring your partner, even if you're coming in as an individual person and your insurance is paying for that. Bring your partner. Bring whoever you need to.
And just in case you're wondering, this video was made after gay marriage was legalized, so we're not referring to that. But there could be some other relationships.
Anything.
Okay. And do you know if premarital counseling is covered? I would think it's not.
I wouldn't call it, not as a premarital counseling, but as individual counseling.
So some kind of individual counseling, right. And it's just if you just so happen to want to bring your intended,
right.
That can be and you're not violating any kind of
no,
coding.
I would never even ask you. I don't care what your relationship is.
I see. Okay.
You're bringing. If you say this is my partner, great. I'm probably going to mark down we did a family session or.
So that's good, because in other words, you might say, well, that sounds really nice, but I don't know if I can afford it. You might as well find out if it's a benefit of your insurance or one of the perks of your employment, because it's one of those, you might as well use it may not lose it, but at least you're not making
Right.
you're not making any use of it if you don't find out. Well, I appreciate knowing that. And for people that may not have coverage or for some reason may not want to notify somebody they're going, I know that there are certain people that go to therapy that pay on a cash basis,
Yes.
not because they don't have coverage, but because they might have political ambitions, or they might say, hey, I just don't really want that out there. It's something I want to keep private. What are your fees generally?
My fees are pretty much $80 an hour, which is fairly, I think it's probably less than a standard rate, but a lot of insurance companies, that's about the rate they will reimburse at. So try to keep that into a reasonable range there. If someone comes in and says, hey, I got nothing, we can definitely talk about what sliding scale with that.
And the average length of a visit?
Usually 55 minutes. The first visit might be 90 minutes, depending on what we're dealing with.
And with what kind of frequency?
Usually weekly. That's what we're looking at, one time a week.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
and
you.
again, for those that didn't get your information at the beginning of the video, would you mind giving your contact information to them one more time?
Yeah, my cell phone is 801-644-9626, and that comes directly to me.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.